And I just think that in companies, in organizations, in cities, people really want to be a part of something bold that's going someplace, and in this case, something that is transformative.
Hey there, Podcast Aquanauts. It's your host, Casey, again. In this episode, we're doing something a little different on the show. This time, we're not talking about the aquarium, at least not in the direct way you usually associate with the podcast. This is less about our animal residence and more of a historical retrospective, but an interesting one, I promise. We were fortunate to have a special guest in the studio dive cage this time, former Chattanooga mayor and two-term U.S. Senator Bob Corker. We invited Corker in to talk about the 20th anniversary of some important civic improvements that took place in Chattanooga under his leadership that made the riverfront and the aquarium the place it is today. The opening of the aquarium in May 1992 marked a tidal shift for Chattanooga. The aquarium's presence brought new life downtown and spread a wave of civic development and growth that made the city a literal case study for civic renewal on a national level. About 10 years later, Chattanooga was on the verge of beginning another sweeping series of investments in downtown institutions and infrastructure, including the aquarium, known as the 21st Century Waterfront Plan. At the time, the aquarium was brainstorming ideas for its first major expansion, the Ocean Journey building. Simultaneously, two other nearby downtown institutions, the Hunter Museum of American Art and Creative Discovery Museum, were planning expansions or significant renovations to their own facilities. Rather than embark on three separate fundraising campaigns, Corker suggested the aquarium and its neighbors join forces to make a single combined request for support. It was, to borrow a term that will come up later in this discussion, a bold, possibly audacious plan, but it ultimately worked. All three institutions got the funding they needed, and the city experienced a second wave of growth downtown that further cemented Chattanooga as a desirable destination to visit and a thriving community in which to live and work. The impact of the 21st Century Waterfront continues to be felt in Chattanooga today, which is why it was such an appealing opportunity to chat with Corker, who some described at the time as the spark plug that made it happen. But I digress. We don't have long with the senator, and I'm already overstaying my welcome. So let's move things along, shall we? On with the podcast. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Podcast Aquatic, the official podcast of the Tennessee Aquarium. Today we have a very special guest in the studio dive cage, actually two special guests. First, we have Senator Bob Corker. You are the former mayor of Chattanooga and a two-term senator in the U.S. Senate.
Yes, sir.
And we are happy to have you here because we're celebrating an anniversary of a very important project to the city of Chattanooga that just passed 20 years. But before we get into talking about that, Todd Womack, you are Senator Corker's former chief of staff while he was in the Senate, and then you worked with him in comms while he was in the mayor's office. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, thanks for having us here.
All right. Well, I'm excited to have you here because before you went on to serve in the Senate, you again were mayor from 2001 to 2005. And during that period, there were a series of huge expansions to downtown institutions. 21st Century Waterfront Plan was the name of that endeavor, right?
That's correct.
So what do you see as the legacy of that series of developments and improvements to Chattanooga?
Well, I think at the time, first of all, when I ran for mayor, I did not run on creating the 21st Century Waterfront. There were 6 other very specific topics relative mostly to economic development that we focused on and did. But a few months after being in office, after knowing that Chattanooga had been touted all across the country as having connected to its waterfront, and realizing that we had a 4-lane divided highway that separated our downtown from the waterfront, I realized that that dream really had not been realized. Although we had the first aquarium here, the freshwater aquarium, it was a great day and great time for our city when that opened in '92. We still were not connected. And so I began to work with the Department of Transportation. I'd been Commissioner of Finance right before being mayor, and so I knew all the players there. We were able to convince the governor to trade the waterfront, in the riverfront parkway that separated us from the waterfront, for another roadway to create a different state route, which gave us ownership of that, the city. And therefore, we began immediately dreaming big, dreaming in a way that the city was unable to dream until that point, because we had the freedom to truly connect to the waterfront. We ended up having a 300-person meeting down at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and we had 15 tables, and people had onion skin paper to work on, and we began to envision what that might be. And then here where I am, with you right now in the IMAX Theater, we began to meet with various architects from around the country to help us design what would become the 21st Century Waterfront Plan. We did so, and as this was happening, all of a sudden the aquarium folks came to us and said, hey, look, we'd love to have a saltwater aquarium. It's something that would really complement what we're doing. And the Hunter Museum said, hey, look, if y'all are getting ready to totally reimagine the waterfront, we'd love to have a $20 million expansion to really make use of our site and really expand the offerings at the Hunter. And then, by the way, the Children's Museum said, hey, while you're doing this, we'd love to have a $10 million renovation and expansion of our facility. So all that was incorporated into our plan. And we didn't want to create just a park. We wanted to have, space for our citizens and people who visited here to be down at the waterfront, but we want to make sure that economic development took place. And so, the green space is in front of a major development that had a parking garage and retail downstairs and condominiums up. And so, anyway, it was a great period of time. We came up with this fantastic plan that really built on our history here at Ross's Landing. And so we created this big model. And as we were developing the model, we went out and were able to convince the hotel and motel community that a tax on hotel and motels would be to their benefit. That was a tough sell in the beginning, but once they realized that we were really going to build this, that this was going to happen in 35 months, which is what I announced at my first State of the City, which was a shock to the community because there was only a few people really working to try to make this happen at the time. But when they realized it was going to happen quickly, they got behind it. We went out and had 81 one-on-one meetings at the River City Company, or rather the Urban Design Studio is, with this model. And in those 81 meetings, one-on-one, I led every one of them. And by the way, if we had people we knew were interested in the aquarium, we'd have somebody from the aquarium board. And if we knew we had people that were interested in the Hunter Museum, we'd have somebody from the Hunter. If we had people that were just interested in our city, that was a different type thing. But anyway, we raised the money that we needed, which was about 45% of the overall $120 million. The other was paid for by the bond issue that hotel motel tax generated. And so it opened 35 months later, May 1 of 2005, and I think has been very transformative for our city. It's been a place where events have occurred, and large events have been brought here. We immediately got the Head of the Hooch, which was a large rowing event, and it's the second largest in the country now, right behind Cambridge. And theirs is only larger because they do it on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we do it on Saturday and Sunday. But we began to do all kinds of other events. It's now getting ready to be refreshed, which I think is fantastic. And I'll stop for a second because I've been talking for quite a while with no questions.
I'm just fascinated, honestly. I moved here in 2007, which was just after the Corker period ended. But I feel like the echo of that work resonates even today. I mean, there's an entire generation of Chattanoogans who are young adults now for whom there has been no other waterfront than the 21st Century Waterfront. I guess for them, it must be difficult to imagine what this part of the city was like before it was given new life through that effort.
Yeah. So my experience, having been mayor and having announced 6 things that had nothing to do with this as our agenda, my experience was that it was, even though the aquarium, again, my hat's off to Jack Lupton and everyone that helped make that happen, and in opening in 92, it was fantastic. But what was really down here other than that was hot parking lots with litter blowing across them. I mean, there was just nothing. It was dead. And it just struck me so much early on in my mayorship that we really hadn't done what we set out to do in the 1986 visioning process that took place. And things just seemed to fall in place for us, and prior relationships had a lot to do with that, if you will, with the state and other places. But we had very little, by the way, public money from state or federal. I mean, it was just nominal. We really did this ourselves here in this community. And I think it did. I think it had a huge effect. I think it built confidence here that if we set out to do something big, we can make that happen. And of course, if you time that with also Enterprise South being completed and us immediately, I was in the Senate by this time, but was, at the center of getting Volkswagen here in our community. But you get that shot in the arm. You get the fact that we became the only city in the Western Hemisphere that had, a gigabit of connectivity to everybody within 600 square miles. And now the power board off of that is now looking at quantum computing, as you know, and building off of that great infrastructure they were willing to put in place at our behest. So anyway, I think it did create, I'm an old man now, I know, and everybody knows that, I'm a has-been, but I do think that created tremendous energy and momentum for our community.
If you look at the last 35 years of history in Chattanooga, I think you could accurately describe us as kind of a bootstrap community. It feels like the decisions that were made back in the 1980s to lift ourselves up and to reimagine a better future for ourselves. I write that sentence a lot, that Chattanooga was brave enough to think differently and to imagine a better future and then to act on that and seize it. And you mentioned earlier that so little of the funding for the 21st Century Waterfront came from federal or state sources. How important to public buy-in in the project was it for it to be funded by the community and through private sources?
Well, it wasn't going to happen otherwise. There just wasn't any thinking about getting any big dollars from the state or federal government. I think all told, maybe a total of $5 million, possibly. I don't remember what the number was, but it was very small relative to the project. What I think took people over the top, I really believe this, is they'd come down to the urban design studio where this model was sitting there. And I think they believed that instead of this plan sitting on a desk someplace, I think they believed we were going to do it and it was going to happen and it was going to really open in 35 months. And their city that they were so proud of was going to be, in many ways, transformed. At least the waterfront was. And I think it was that. I think that is what caused the buy-in. And then, by the way, after we had this 300-person meeting, we decided, public art would be something to really cherish as it relates to the 21st century, but also a great way to bring more creative people to our community. And so we had the next meeting, we had a public art meeting. And lo and behold, because something kind of cool came out of the first meeting, 500 people showed up for that meeting, okay? And as you can imagine, it led to us, if you look at the pier down, the pier is really art built into it. The connection between downtown and the Hunter Museum, you have art along the way. Other artists participated in other ways. And then when I was 50, I was about halfway through my term as mayor, I took a 100-mile bike ride. And I did it just to prove that I was still alive at 50 and able to function. And I rode from North Chattanooga up one side of Lookout, off the back of Lookout down into Alabama, and then back up again the other side of Lookout, and then back down to North Chattanooga, and had an adult beverage when I finished. But in any event, I saw people kayaking, or they had kayaks. I stopped at country stores to get water, and they were going caving and bouldering. I saw people hang gliding, saw people running, biking. And it dawned on me that we had an incredible outdoor community. I bumped into a guy at Quality Tire the next Saturday. I was down there having my tires realigned or something, and this guy from Colorado was in there. And I knew he talked differently than me, and I asked him where he was from, and he said, well, I'm from Colorado. Really? I said, what are you here for? And he said, well, I moved my technology company here because this is the best outdoor community that I've been able to find. Monday morning, I go on the talk radio show that I went on once a month to talk about what we were doing. I said, hey, Mayor, what are we going to do next? And I said, well, we are going to become the Boulder, Colorado of the East. And so we set out to do that. And, of course, we used the waterfront for a lot of that, right? But we had an outdoor meeting, and 900 people showed up for that meeting. It was incredible. And, by the way, benefiting from the outdoors is free. Championing the outdoors is free to our community. And so now I tell people, and I believe this to be true, Boulder, Colorado wishes they were the Chattanooga of the West. So anyway, I say all that to say it's amazing what happens when people believe that what they're involved in is really going to become a reality. And I do think that those things help create a context for our community and a feel for our community that today we're benefiting from, and that I do think it's the kind of place that people want to live.
I was thinking about this earlier, that in a sense, you actually share a lot of qualities in common with our conservation scientists out at the Conservation Institute. To do a lot of the conservation work that we do, restoring species, in a sense, kind of like you restore a city, it's something that has to take place in the long term. There's a lot of patience involved, and it sounds like there's a lot of optimism. Our scientists have often told me that in the working with animals that are on the brink or in the decline, you have to be optimistic or it's impossible to do the job. So at any point in the course of those 80 plus meetings that you were going through to try and drum up support, did you ever lose sense of that, lose sight of or grasp of that optimism? Or did you see a path forward all the way through?
Oh, no, we saw a path all the way through. There was just, well, first of all, once you say you're going to do something publicly, like we did in our first state of the city, which, again, was a shock to most, you got to do it. You got to make it happen. And it was just amazing, too, the way that it went. The first meeting we had with TVA, because we said, hey, look, we're going to do this, and we're going to raise the money. It's going to be 100% paid for when we finish, from the standpoint of any kind of, this was not going to be a drag on a future mayor, right? I mean, it was going to, all the financing was going to be in place. And first meeting with TVA, they had 12 people show up. Now, I don't know how many, I know a lot of people work with TVA, but to have the first meeting have 12 people from TVA show up, because we were redirecting the river just a hair, part of it. And they wanted to know what they could do. They were there to figure out how they could help us. With the tribes, it was amazing how the tribes worked with us. And of course, we celebrated their history with the passage that's created down there. It was just an amazing time, and how people came out of places we would have never imagined to help make it happen. And again, I tell people all the time this. I love being mayor of the city. Being a senator and being chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee was a great, great privilege. But being mayor was so rewarding. And I tell people that you can't imagine, there's no politics involved. If you have a bold vision and people really believe that you have the ability to pull people together and make it happen, there just isn't. There's no politics. And the reason I think we have so much in the way of petty politics and people fighting at each other is that I just don't think we have enough who are willing to get out there and create a bold vision for a country or for whatever it might be. And I think because of that, especially in cities, you end up having this bickering that takes place, and it's just unnecessary. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves in life. They just do. But, we just, the city council, we just didn't really have to spend a lot of, we wanted to because we wanted everybody to be a part of what we're doing, but there just wasn't the backbiting or fighting. And I just think that in companies, in organizations, in cities, people really want to be a part of something bold that's going someplace. And in this case, something that is transformative.
Well, let's look forward then, because I know I need to wrap this episode up. I know you have a lot of things on your plate. So having captured lightning in a bottle once, do you think that there is a spirit that persists in Chattanooga of willingness to engage in this sort of across the aisles, if you want to make it political, but agreeing to move forward together on a large project like this? Could we repeat it again? Because Chattanooga has been, I think, very understandably lauded for being a forward-thinking city that's not content to rest on its laurels, to continue to evolve and change and undergo transformative projects like the 21st Century Waterfront. Could we do it again? Or have we gotten to a point where we can't? Is there the possibility for a third chapter of self-renewal in Chattanooga's future?
I definitely think that there is. And I think that communities have a life just like human beings where, you go through a period of time and you're building off the past, or you're moving along, and then you wake up one day and you go, gosh, we really, it's time for us to do something. We need to become alive again. And I think that the city has through the years, built a great sense of community. But I think should it happen that a mayor were to step up and say, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do, these are the 4 to 6 tangible things that are going to happen, I'm going to risk my reputation on them happening, and I will feel like I have let down every constituent in the city if I have not completed this by the time I leave office in 4 years. I believe that, yes. But you know what? It doesn't really have to be by a mayor. The first renewal that you're talking about that took place in 1986 really began in 84 with a visioning process. I was just a young business guy in my 30s with a company growing at 80% a year and running all around the country, but attending all of these meetings because I wanted to be part of something, like I said, bigger than myself as a young guy in my 30s. But that was really led by the private sector. It was a private sector-driven initiative that the public sector endorsed. We had a wonderful mayor named Gene Roberts who endorsed what came out of those things, did not work against it, and had the self-confidence, honestly, to allow the private sector to drive that effort and to not work against it like can happen, if you will, with petty politicians. So it can happen from the private sector. It can happen through mayoral leadership. Either way, though, yes, people long for that. I tell you what, especially today, people long for it. There's an isolation in America today that didn't exist in '86 and didn't in the early 2000s when we did what we did. There's an isolation. I notice it. It's really interesting. And I think that today, either the private sector or the public sector could actually grasp and channel that in a way that may be even more fulfilling to our citizens, because I do think there's an isolation of people working from home, not going to offices as much, not going to public gatherings as much. So the answer is yes. I'm sorry to be so long-winded.
No, I'm just thankful for your time. And before I go, Todd, at this point, I've basically ignored you for 23 minutes and 20 seconds.
That's the right call, I think.
Todd, do you have...
What's happening these days? They're all paying attention to him and ignoring me. So
that is not true. But
Todd, I would love, before we end this, lest I waste your introduction and my introduction to the episode, do you have any parting thoughts about what Senator Corker has discussed regarding the history of 21st Century Waterfront Plan, its legacy, or the need for things to change, or the ability for things to change in Chattanooga as we move forward?
Yeah, the one thing I would just kind of build on that Senator Corker's talked about is that, when he made that audacious, we're going to build this. We had like no plans, no clear plan. We'd done planning, but in 35 months, people laughed. I mean, people came up after and said that was nice to set a big goal. There's no way you'll reach it. When I remember the day that he went on that talk show and said, we're going to become the Boulder of the East, and they like laughed at him, like on the if we were sitting with microphones like this, and the radio host said, we are never going to be the Boulder of the East, and because I don't think people realized that was possible. So leadership is about, and what he is so good at doing is being able to see the end and being able really to challenge people to do something bigger than they would have ever expected. And you have to be, you have to know you might get laughed at, and people might not believe it's possible, but then all of a sudden it is possible, and it does start to change yourself. It changed my self-confidence. It changed, I would not be sitting here today. There's a lot of places I wouldn't be sitting if he hadn't encouraged me to have a much bigger vision for what's possible. And I think he did that for our entire community. And Chattanooga is a place where a great leader can create that kind of vision, and people will follow behind. But it was an amazing time, and as we start to rethink what the built environment here in Chattanooga is going to look like, it's exciting to think what the next 20 years will bring. But certainly the leadership of Senator Corker over several decades now has just been so impactful.
I'm so glad you described it as audacious. I almost used that characterization when I was talking about it, and I worried that it would be somehow offensive. But I've also described the aquarium itself as a pipe dream come true, something that it should not have worked, and yet it did. And I don't know that it would have worked somewhere else. So I think there's something special about the kinds of projects that we've discussed today, but also the community, because I don't think that I think they're hand in glove. I think you couldn't have done some of these things without the citizens of this community who have that kind of, like I said, bootstrap spirit. So I will go ahead and end the episode here. I know that, again, you've got a lot on your plate, but Senator Corker, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this episode, looking back at the 20-year legacy of the 21st Century Waterfront Plan, and looking into the future that hopefully is just as bright or brighter here in Chattanooga. Todd, I'm sorry to have neglected you so thoroughly.
You didn't neglect me at all. I loved every minute of it.
Well, thank you for joining us nonetheless, and I will go ahead and end things here. If you have an idea for a future episode of the podcast Aquatic, or a question for one of our experts, maybe I can convince Senator Corker, but let me pass on an email or two. In the meantime, until next time, remember that every drop matters.